There is a dangerous, intoxicating illusion that comes with a badge and a gun. It makes small men feel like gods. But what happens when a predator in uniform pulls over a man whose entire life has been forged in the fires of elite combat? Officer Harlan Voss thought he had caught an easy target driving through his wealthy town. He didn't know the man behind the wheel was a decorated Army Ranger, and tonight, the hunter would become the hunted. The 1969 Chevrolet Chevelle CSS rumbled along the blacktop of Highway 9. Its big block V8 engine purred with a deep, resonant growl that only came from thousands of hours of meticulous restoration. Behind the wheel sat Captain Elias Thorne, a man who had spent the better part of his adult life navigating hostile territories that most people only saw on the evening news. He had recently returned stateside after wrapping up another combat deployment as an Army Ranger. The transition from the adrenaline-soaked mountains of the Middle East to the quiet, tree-lined highways of North Carolina was always jarring. Out there, every shadow held a potential threat. Here, the greatest danger was supposed to be a deer darting across the asphalt. The Chevelle was his sanctuary. It had belonged to his late father, Theodore, who had purchased it brand new before shipping off to Vietnam. When Theodore passed away years ago, Elias had poured his grief and his deployment savings into bringing the classic muscle car back to showroom perfection. The gleaming midnight blue paint caught the amber glow of the setting sun, and for the first time in months, Elias felt his shoulders drop from their permanent, tension-locked position. He was heading to Oak Ridge Creek, a wealthy, insular suburb known for its manicured estates, country clubs, and aggressively enforced borders. Elias had no desire to be in Oak Ridge Creek, but he had a dinner engagement with his commanding officer, Colonel Silas Grant, who had recently purchased a retirement home in the area. As Elias crossed the town line, the speed limit abruptly dropped. Anticipating the infamous speed traps of Oak Ridge Creek, he had already downshifted, coasting smoothly well under the limit. He drove with the precision of a man who left nothing to chance. His seatbelt was fastened, both hands rested at 10 and 2 on the wooden steering wheel, and every light on the classic car was in perfect working order. He was wearing civilian clothes, a fitted gray thermal Henley and dark denim jeans. Without his uniform, the medals and the combat patches, he looked like any other civilian. More specifically to certain eyes, he looked like a large, muscular black man driving a valuable vintage car through a neighborhood where the median income sat comfortably in the top 1%. Elias saw the cruiser tucked behind the thick oak trees near the town welcome sign before the officer even hit the ignition. His combat-trained eyes automatically tracked the silhouette of the patrol car. A moment later, the cruiser pulled out, tires kicking up a small cloud of gravel, and aggressively fell in behind the Chevelle. Elias didn't alter his speed. He kept his eyes on the road, glancing briefly in the rearview mirror. The patrol car tailgated him for a solid mile, riding so close that Elias couldn't even see its headlights in his mirrors. It was a classic intimidation tactic, designed to make a driver nervous, to force them to cross a double yellow line or tap the brakes too hard, giving the officer the paper-thin excuse needed for a traffic stop. Elias didn't bite. His resting heart rate was low, and taking incoming fire in hostile valleys had been far more stressful than a tailgating local cop. Then the flashing red and blue lights erupted, cutting through the encroaching twilight. The short, angry burst of the police siren chirped, demanding submission. Elias sighed, his broad chest rising and falling slowly. He knew exactly what this was. He activated his right turn signal, slowly decelerated, and bypassed a narrow, dark stretch of shoulder in favor of pulling into the brightly lit parking lot of a closed gas station ahead. It was a standard safety protocol, beneficial for both the driver and the officer, ensuring visibility and reducing the risk of being struck by passing traffic. He parked the Chevelle neatly, turned off the engine, and removed the keys from the ignition, placing them visibly on the dashboard. He rolled down all four windows, turned on the interior dome light, and placed his large hands firmly back on the top of the steering wheel. He made himself entirely visible, removing any ambiguity, any shadow, and any excuse an officer might use to claim they feared for their life. In the side mirror, Elias watched the door of the patrol car swing open. Officer Harlan Voss stepped out. He was a man in his 40s with a flushed complexion and a thick, heavy-set frame that strained the buttons of his tailored uniform. Voss adjusted his duty belt, resting his right hand casually but deliberately on the butt of his sidearm as he approached the driver's side of the Chevelle. Elias took a slow, deep breath, mentally preparing himself for the theater he was about to participate in. The heavy footsteps stopped just behind the B-pillar of the Chevelle. Officer Voss didn't step fully into the window frame. He hung back in the driver's blind spot, forcing Elias to turn his head awkwardly to make eye contact. It was another textbook power play. Voss shone a high-lumen tactical flashlight directly into the rearview mirror, bouncing the blinding beam straight into Elias's eyes. "Evening, officer," Elias said, his voice calm, deep, and devoid of any confrontational edge. Voss didn't return the greeting. He stood in silence for several long seconds, scanning the pristine interior of the classic car, his eyes lingering on the leather bucket seats and the polished chrome shifter. "Whose car is this, boy?" Voss finally asked. The last word was dropped with heavy, deliberate emphasis. It wasn't a casual slip of the tongue. It was a calculated insult, a verbal test of dominance. Elias's jaw tightened imperceptibly, but his expression remained a mask of polite indifference. "It's my vehicle, officer. Is there a reason you pulled me over tonight?" "I ask the questions here," Voss snapped, leaning down slightly so his face was visible in the window frame. "I asked whose car it is. A ride like this costs more than a house in some neighborhoods. You don't look like the type of guy who restores classic American steel." "I have the registration right here," Elias replied, keeping his hands glued to the steering wheel. "My license, registration, and proof of insurance are in my wallet in my right back pocket. Do I have your permission to retrieve them?" Voss sneered, clearly annoyed by Elias's procedural perfection. People who knew their rights and followed protocol were harder to break down. "Slowly. No sudden movements. I see a shadow I don't like, and we're going to have a serious problem." Elias shifted his weight, slowly reached into his back pocket and pulled out his leather wallet. With deliberate, telegraphed movements, he extracted his driver's license, the vehicle's registration, and his insurance card. As a secondary measure, he also pulled out his green active-duty military identification card and handed the stack through the window. Voss snatched the cards from Elias's hand. He shone his light on the driver's license. "Elias Thorne, Fayetteville," Voss read aloud, butchering the pronunciation with a lazy drawl. "You're a long way from home, Elias. What brings you to Oak Ridge Creek? We don't get a lot of tourists like you out here." "I'm visiting a friend for dinner," Elias said. Voss shuffled the cards deliberately, ignoring the military ID. He looked at the registration. "Car is registered in your name. How'd you afford it? You steal it or deal for it?" Elias's eyes locked onto Voss's. The ranger training kicked in, the psychological conditioning that allowed him to compartmentalize anger and focus purely on the objective. The objective here was to survive the encounter and expose the man standing outside his window. "It was an inheritance from my father," Elias answered, his tone dropping an octave, becoming rigid and formal. "Again, officer, I need you to articulate the reason for this traffic stop. I was traveling under the posted speed limit. My vehicle is in complete mechanical compliance, and I maintain my lane." "You were swerving," Voss lied effortlessly, stepping closer to the door. "Crossed the solid white line twice back there on Highway 9. That's failure to maintain a lane, suspicion of driving under the influence." "I respectfully disagree with your assessment," Elias said. He subtly glanced at Voss's chest. The black square of the Axon body camera was pinned to the officer's uniform, but the small red indicator light, which should have been blinking to indicate it was recording, was dead. Voss had intentionally powered it down before stepping out of his cruiser. Elias reached up with his right hand and tapped the face of his smartwatch, discreetly activating the voice memo application. If there wasn't going to be police video, there was absolutely going to be an audio record. "I don't care if you disagree," Voss spat, leaning closer, practically putting his head inside the open window. "I smell something coming from this vehicle. Smells like marijuana." Elias mentally shook his head. It was the oldest, most abused loophole in law enforcement history, the fabricated scent of narcotics, an invisible, unprovable claim that granted an officer immediate probable cause to bypass the Fourth Amendment and tear a vehicle apart. "Officer, there is no marijuana in this vehicle," Elias stated clearly and loudly, ensuring his watch picked up every syllable. "I do not smoke. I am an active duty captain in the United States Army Rangers. I am subjected to random urinalysis. If you look at the military ID you are holding, you will see my rank and status." Voss finally glanced at the green card. He scoffed and tossed it back through the window. It landed on Elias's lap. "Anyone can buy a fake plastic card at an Army surplus store. You expect me to believe a guy like you is a captain in the Rangers? Please. You probably washed out of basic training and kept the ID to try and get out of speeding tickets." Elias didn't touch the ID on his lap. His hands went right back to the steering wheel. "If you suspect my identification is forged, I invite you to run it through your dispatch terminal, or you can call the Provost Marshal at Fort Liberty to verify my identity. But I will state again for the record, there is no contraband in this car, and I have committed no traffic violations." Voss's face darkened. The flush in his cheeks deepened into an angry crimson. He wasn't used to defiance, let alone calm, articulate, hyper-logical defiance. In Voss's world, people cowered. They begged. They got angry, started yelling, and gave him the excuse he needed to escalate to physical violence. Elias was offering him a brick wall of perfect compliance. "Sit tight, Captain," Voss said, dripping with sarcasm. "Keep your hands where I can see them. I'm going to run your tags. If I find out this car is stolen, you're going out of here in bracelets." Voss turned and walked back to his cruiser, heavy boots crunching on the pavement. Left alone in the dim light of the gas station, Elias finally let out a slow exhale. He looked at his watch. It was recording perfectly. He then reached up to the dashboard and tapped his dash cam. The camera was small, discreet, and pointed both out the windshield and inward into the cabin. It had been recording in high definition with full audio since he turned the key. Voss hadn't noticed it yet. Elias knew this wasn't over. A cop like Voss didn't back down. When their authority was challenged by someone they deemed inferior, they doubled down. Elias prepared himself for the inevitable escalation. Several minutes dragged by. The silence of the abandoned gas station was broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the Chevelle's cooling exhaust pipes and the low static of the police radio echoing from Voss's cruiser. Elias watched the rearview mirror. He could see Voss sitting in the driver's seat, bathed in the harsh blue light of his mobile data terminal. Voss was typing furiously, likely trying to find any outstanding warrant, any unpaid parking ticket, any excuse to justify what he was about to do. He would find nothing. Elias's record wasn't just clean, it was spotless. Suddenly, a second set of headlights swept across the parking lot. Another Oak Ridge Creek patrol car pulled in swiftly, parking at an aggressive angle that blocked the Chevelle from moving forward. A younger officer, Rookie Officer Caleb Reed, according to his silver nameplate, stepped out. He looked fresh out of the academy, with an eager but nervous energy. Voss exited his vehicle and intercepted Reed near the rear bumper of the Chevelle. Elias couldn't hear their exact words, but the body language was clear. Voss was gesturing wildly toward Elias's car, painting a picture. Reed nodded along, looking apprehensively at the sleek muscle car. The two officers approached. Voss took the lead, returning to the driver's side window, while Reed flanked the passenger side, shining his own flashlight into the car. "All right, Thorne," Voss said, his voice dropping all pretense of a routine traffic stop. "Step out of the vehicle." "Officer," Elias replied, his voice remaining terrifyingly steady. "I have provided my identification and my registration, which I assume came back clean. Am I receiving a citation, or am I free to go?" "I said, step out of the damn car," Voss barked, his hand unclasping the retention strap on his holster. The unmistakable sound of the leather snapping open echoed in the quiet night. It was a lethal threat. "I am asking for clarification," Elias continued, turning his head to look directly into Voss's eyes. "Are you ordering me out of the vehicle?"
"Yes, I am ordering you out of the vehicle,"
Voss shouted, spit flying onto the Chevelle's window glass. "Under Pennsylvania versus Mims, I have the right to order you out, and I have probable cause to search this vehicle based on the odor of narcotics. Now get out before I shatter this window and drag you out." Elias didn't flinch at the shouting. "I am complying with your lawful order to exit the vehicle," he said loudly. "I am unbuckling my seatbelt with my right hand. My left hand remains on the wheel." Elias moved with slow, deliberate precision. Click. The seatbelt retracted. "I am now reaching for the door handle with my left hand." Elias pulled the latch and pushed the heavy steel door open. He swung his legs out and stood up. When Elias Thorne stood at full height, the physical dynamic of the encounter shifted violently. At 6'3" and 220 pounds of conditioned muscle, Elias towered over the out-of-shape patrolman. The gray thermal shirt clung to his broad shoulders and thick chest. He looked exactly like what he was, a highly trained Tier 1 operator. Voss involuntarily took a hurried step backward, his hand instantly wrapping around the grip of his pistol. His eyes widened slightly as he took in the sheer size of the man he had been bullying. On the other side of the car, Rookie Officer Reed unholstered his taser, his hands trembling slightly. "Face the car," Voss commanded, his voice cracking just a fraction. "Put your hands on the roof. Spread your legs." Elias turned smoothly, placing his palms flat against the cool metal of the Chevelle's roof. He spread his feet. "I am complying," he stated. "However, I state for the record that I do not consent to any search of my person or my vehicle." Voss stepped forward and began the pat-down. It wasn't a standard safety frisk for weapons. It was meant to demean. Voss kicked Elias's ankles forcefully to widen his stance and ran his hands aggressively up Elias's inner thighs, pushing the boundaries of a standard Terry frisk. Elias felt the anger flare up in his chest, a hot, searing spike of pure rage. He closed his eyes and breathed through his nose. Discipline, he told himself. Let him dig the grave. Let him jump in. "He's clean," Voss grunted, clearly disappointed not to find a weapon or contraband. "Reed, keep an eye on him. If he twitches, tase him." Reed moved to the front of the car, keeping his taser pointed at Elias's center mass. "Don't move, man," Reed said, his voice tight. Just stay still." "I'm not going anywhere, Officer Reed," Elias said calmly. "I suggest you activate your body camera. Officer Voss's seems to be malfunctioning." Reed looked confused, glancing at his senior partner's chest, then down at his own camera, ensuring the red light was blinking. Voss ignored the exchange and dove into the Chevelle. He was brutal. He ripped the floor mats out, tossing them onto the greasy asphalt. He tore through the center console, dumping registration papers, charging cables, and sunglasses onto the passenger seat. He jammed his flashlight under the seats, scraping the restored leather. Elias watched over his shoulder, his jaw clenched so tightly his teeth ached. The disrespect for his father's memory was harder to stomach than the physical pat-down. Well, Voss's muffled voice echoed from inside the cabin. "What do we have here?" Voss backed out of the passenger side door, holding a heavy black steel lockbox. It was roughly the size of a thick dictionary, secured with a biometric thumbprint scanner and a heavy-duty combination dial. "What is this, Thorne?" Voss demanded, walking around to the front of the car and slamming the metal box down hard onto the hood of the Chevelle. Elias flinched at the sound of the metal scraping against his father's flawless paint job. That was a desecration. "That is a secured private container," Elias said coldly. "I know what it is," Voss sneered. "It's a drug safe. Or maybe you've got an unregistered piece in here. Open it." "No," Elias said. The word hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Voss blinked, stunned by the flat refusal. "Excuse me? I said no," Elias repeated, turning his head to look Voss dead in the eye. "You claimed you had probable cause to search the vehicle based on the fabricated scent of marijuana. Even if that lie held up in court, which it won't, that does not grant you the right to bypass a locked, secured container without a warrant. I do not consent to you opening that box." Voss laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You think you're a lawyer now, boy? I don't need a warrant when I have reasonable suspicion that a felony is being committed. Now put your thumb on this scanner and open the damn box, or you are going to jail for obstruction of justice." "Officer Voss," Elias said, his voice dropping into a register that sent a chill down Rookie Reed's spine. "I'm going to give you one final opportunity to de-escalate this situation. You are stepping into territory that will end your career. I highly recommend you call your watch commander down here before you try to force that box open. You do not want to see what is inside." Voss's face twisted into an ugly mask of pure arrogance. To him, Elias's warning wasn't a lifeline. It was a challenge to his authority. "Reed," Voss barked, his eyes never leaving Elias's. "Go to the trunk of my cruiser. Get the breaching pry bar." Reed hesitated. Sir, are you sure? We could just call it in? Get a warrant if we need." "I said get the damn bar, Reed," Voss roared. "I'm not waiting on some judge while this thug stands here giving me orders. Move!" Reed scrambled to the cruiser. Elias looked at the steel box resting on the hood of his car. Inside that box wasn't drugs, and it wasn't an unregistered weapon. Inside that box was a collection of heavily classified briefing documents, highly sensitive cryptographic keys for military communications, and a personal signed letter from the Secretary of Defense regarding Captain Thorne's upcoming promotion and deployment strategy. And Voss was about to pry it open in the parking lot of a gas station. Elias looked back at Voss, a cold, almost pitying look in his eyes. The trap was set, the bait was taken, and the jaws were about to snap shut. "You're making a massive mistake," Elias whispered. "Shut up," Voss smiled, taking the heavy iron pry bar from a trembling Reed. "Let's see what you're hiding." The screech of tortured metal echoed across the empty asphalt. Officer Voss jammed the heavy iron pry bar beneath the reinforced lid of the lockbox, using the pristine midnight blue hood of the Chevelle for leverage. Elias closed his eyes for a fraction of a second as the iron gouged deep into his father's custom paint job, scraping down to the bare steel. It was a desecration, but the destruction of the car was nothing compared to the catastrophic legal boundary Voss was currently obliterating. "Officer Reed," Elias said over his shoulder, his voice projecting clearly, "I want you to visually verify and note the time. Officer Voss is forcibly bypassing a federally secured container." Reed swallowed hard, his hand still shaking on the grip of his taser. He glanced at his smartwatch, a look of profound unease washing over his young face. Sir, maybe we should stop and call the shift supervisor." "Shut up, Reed," Voss grunted, his face red with exertion as he threw his entire body weight onto the pry bar. With a deafening crack, the heavy-duty hinges surrendered. The biometric lock sparked once, emitting a high-pitched digital whine before dying. The lid of the box flew open, clattering against the windshield. Voss dropped the pry bar onto the damaged hood, a triumphant smirk plastered across his sweaty face. "Let's see the stash, Captain." He reached inside and pulled out the contents. There were no bags of white powder. There were no illegal firearms. There were only thick, heavy-stock manila folders, a solid-state cryptographic hard drive stamped with a red barcode, and a leather-bound portfolio. Voss frowned, flipping open the first folder. The bold crimson lettering across the top and bottom of every single page screamed out in the dim light of the gas station. "Top secret, //SCI//NOFORN." Beneath the classification markings were detailed satellite topographies of a region in Eastern Europe, overlaid with Joint Special Operations Command troop movements, logistical supply chains, and highly sensitive intelligence reports detailing foreign adversarial capabilities. "What the hell is this?" Voss muttered, his thumb smudging a highly classified satellite photograph. "You're making fake spy documents to sell online? Is this some kind of LARP thing?" "Officer Voss," Elias stated, his voice ringing out with absolute icy authority. "You are holding classified intelligence documents belonging to the United States Department of Defense. You have just committed a Class A felony under the Espionage Act by forcibly bypassing a secured container and accessing sensitive compartmented information without clearance. Put the documents back." Voss barked a laugh, though it sounded a little thinner, a little less confident. He tossed the first folder carelessly onto the windshield and opened the leather portfolio. Inside rested heavy cardstock stationery bearing the gold-embossed seal of the Department of Defense. Voss read the signature at the bottom aloud. Lloyd J. Austin III, Secretary of Defense. He looked up, a sneer twisting his lips. You really went all out on the props, Thorne, forging a signature from the SECDEF. You're going to federal prison for fraud. Yeah, read the letter, Voss, Elias said, his eyes locking onto the older cop. Voss's eyes scanned the page. The letter was a personal commendation and an authorization for Captain Elias Thorne to retain custody of the cryptographic drive for transit to a secured JSOC briefing at Fort Liberty. It outlined in no uncertain terms the federal authority granted to Elias during this transit. For a brief second, a flicker of doubt crossed Voss's eyes, but his pride, swollen by years of unchecked authority in Oak Ridge Creek, violently pushed it away. He couldn't be wrong. He wouldn't be wrong. Get your hands behind your back, Voss suddenly roared, unhooking the handcuffs from his belt. You're under arrest for forgery, obstruction of justice, and suspected espionage. Reed, cuff him. Elias did not resist. He knew better. He slowly brought his hands behind his broad back, interlacing his fingers. Reed stepped forward hesitantly, holstering his taser and pulling out his own cuffs. He ratcheted the cold steel around Elias's thick wrists. The cuffs were tight, biting into his skin. In the back of my cruiser, Voss ordered, gathering the spilled classified documents in a messy, crumpled pile and shoving them back into the broken lockbox. You're done, boy. As Reed escorted him toward the squad car, Elias glanced down at the shattered remains of the lockbox on his hood. What Voss didn't know, what his localized small-town brain couldn't possibly comprehend, was that the high-pitched whine the box had emitted when broken wasn't just failure. It was a tamper-evident distress beacon linked directly to the Department of Defense's global monitoring network. The signal had instantly alerted JSOC headquarters and the United States Army Criminal Investigation Division that top-secret materials were being violently compromised. GPS coordinates had been transmitted. A Tier 1 rapid response protocol had automatically been initiated. Elias ducked his head and slid into the cramped, hard plastic back seat of the police cruiser. The trap hadn't just snapped shut. The jaws had locked. Voss was a dead man walking. The interior of the cruiser smelled of stale coffee and industrial disinfectant. Elias sat in silence, the heavy steel of the handcuffs digging into his wrists. Outside, Voss was strutting around the Chevelle taking photos with his personal cell phone, completely ignorant of the digital tripwire he had just severed. Reed slid into the driver's seat of the cruiser, shutting the door. He didn't look back at Elias. The young rookie was staring at his laptop terminal, his face illuminated by the harsh blue light of the screen. He was running Elias's name and the vehicle identification number through the National Crime Information Center database. Elias watched in the reflection of the plexiglass divider as Reed's eyes widened. The rookie's mouth fell open in a silent, "Oh." The screen hadn't just returned a clean record. It had returned a red-flagged restricted file, a marker indicating that the individual queried was an active-duty Tier 1 operative, accompanied by a glaring notification to contact the Department of Defense immediately upon detention. Reed slowly turned around in his seat, looking through the metal grate at Elias. The arrogance of the uniform had completely melted off the rookie's face, replaced by a pale, sick dread. "Sir," Reed whispered, his voice trembling, Are you really JSOC?" "I am," Elias replied calmly. "And your partner just forcefully accessed a Level 5 encrypted lockbox containing actionable compartmentalized intelligence. He has contaminated the chain of custody and exposed top-secret documents to an unsecured environment." Reed swallowed, a bead of sweat tracing down his temple. He thought it was drugs. He thought it was fake. "Ignorance of the law is not an excuse, Officer Reed. You enforce that rule every day. Tonight, it applies to you." Elias leaned slightly forward against the constraints. "Look out your windshield. Tell me what you see." Reed turned his head. Far down Highway 9, cresting the hill that led out of Oak Ridge Creek, a procession of headlights was appearing. But they weren't moving at the standard speed limit. They were coming fast, eating up the blacktop with aggressive velocity. Suddenly, the police radio mounted on the dashboard erupted into chaotic static. Unit 4, this is dispatch. Come in immediately. Over. The dispatcher's voice was panicked, a stark contrast to the usual bored monotone. Reed grabbed the radio mic with a shaky hand. This is Unit 4, Reed speaking. Reed? Where is Voss? We just received a Priority 1 override call from the FBI field office in Charlotte and the Provost Marshal at Fort Liberty. They are demanding your exact coordinates. What the hell is going on out there? Before Reed could respond, the wail of sirens pierced the night air. But these weren't the standard chirps of local law enforcement. It was the deep, guttural howl of heavy federal response vehicles. 4 massive, unmarked matte black Chevrolet Suburbans swarmed into the gas station parking lot. Their high-beam headlights washed the entire area in blinding white light. They moved with military precision, boxing in both Oak Ridge Creek patrol cars and Elias's Chevelle in a tactical enclosure. Voss, who had been leaning against Elias's car, froze. He squinted against the glaring lights, his hand instinctively dropping to his sidearm. Hey, this is an active crime scene. Back off, he shouted, completely misreading the situation. The doors of the Suburbans flew open simultaneously. More than a dozen heavily armed men stepped out. Some wore full tactical gear with FBI emblazoned in stark yellow letters across their plate carriers. Others wore the sleek, subdued multicam uniforms of military police. Their rifles were held securely at the low ready. Hands away from your weapon! A thunderous voice echoed from a megaphone. Step away from the vehicle now! Voss's jaw dropped. The reality of the situation finally violently shattered his delusion. He slowly raised his hands, stepping away from the Chevelle. His eyes darted frantically between the heavily armed federal agents surrounding him. From the lead Suburban, a tall, imposing man in a pristine army dress uniform stepped out. It was Colonel Silas Grant, the man Elias had been driving to meet. Grant's face was carved from granite, his eyes blazing with a fury that could melt steel. He marched directly toward Voss, flanked by 2 CID agents. Who is the commanding officer of this scene? Colonel Grant demanded, his voice slicing through the chaos like a whip. I am, Voss stammered, trying to puff out his chest but failing miserably under the crushing weight of the colonel's glare. Officer Harlan Voss, Oak Ridge Creek PD. We have a suspect in custody for forgery and— Shut your mouth, Colonel Grant snapped, stepping so close to Voss that the officer had to lean back. You don't have a suspect. You have a United States Army Ranger captain unlawfully detained. And if what my command center just told me is true, you have forcefully accessed a Department of Defense secured courier box. Grant's eyes flicked to the hood of the Chevelle. He saw the gouged paint, the shattered metal of the lockbox, and the highly classified manila folders scattered carelessly on the windshield. The color completely drained from Colonel Grant's face, replaced by a terrifying cold rage. He looked back at Voss, who was now trembling visibly. Agent Miller, Colonel Grant said, not breaking eye contact with the local cop. An FBI agent stepped forward. Yes, Colonel. Disarm this man, Grant ordered, pointing a finger directly at Voss's chest. Arrest him, read him his rights, and prep him for federal transport. Voss gasped, taking a frantic step back. Wait, no, you can't do this. I have jurisdiction here. He crossed the white line. I smelled marijuana. You smelled nothing but your own ego, Grant said softly. You have just compromised a Level 5 intelligence packet sanctioned by the Secretary of Defense. By tomorrow morning, you will be in a federal holding cell. By next month, you will be in Leavenworth. As the FBI agents moved in, stripping Voss of his gun belt and slamming him against the side of his own cruiser, Reed sat frozen in the driver's seat, watching his mentor's career end in spectacular fashion. Elias sat quietly in the back, watching the flashing red and blue lights paint the parking lot. The storm he had warned Voss about had arrived, and it was glorious. Inside the suffocating confines of the police cruiser, Rookie Officer Reed was hyperventilating. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly, his knuckles were white. His wide eyes fixed on the terrifying spectacle unfolding through the windshield. The federal agents moved with a synchronized, ruthless efficiency that local law enforcement could only dream of. A sharp, authoritative rap on the driver's side window made Reed jump out of his skin. Colonel Grant stood outside, his face a mask of uncompromising military authority. Reed scrambled to roll down the window, his fingers fumbling violently with the controls. "Yes, sir. Colonel." "Unlock the doors, officer," Grant commanded, his voice cold enough to freeze water. "And get the cuffs off my captain. Now."
"Yes, sir. Right away, sir."
Reed threw the cruiser into park, unlocked the rear doors, and practically fell out of the driver's seat in his haste to open the back door. His hands shook violently as he inserted the small universal key into the cuffs binding Elias's wrists. The heavy steel ratchets clicked open. Elias rolled his broad shoulders, bringing his hands forward and rubbing the deep red indentations left by the tight metal. He stepped out of the cruiser, towering over the trembling rookie. "Captain Thorne," Colonel Grant said, his rigid posture softening just a fraction as he extended a hand. "Are you injured?" "No, sir," Elias replied, shaking his commanding officer's hand firmly. "Just a minor inconvenience. Protocol was followed to the letter." The distress beacon functioned exactly as engineered the second the lockbox was breached. "I see that," Grant said, his eyes drifting over to the shattered Chevelle hood where CID agents donning white forensic gloves were already meticulously gathering the scattered classified documents, slipping them into secure, opaque evidence bags. "I apologize for the delay. We had to scramble the Joint Task Force from Fort Liberty and the Charlotte Field Office. They broke land speed records getting down Highway 9. The timing was impeccable, Colonel." Across the parking lot, the sound of a grown man panicking shattered the night. Officer Harlan Voss was pinned against the side of his own patrol car, his arms wrenched behind his back, while a stoic FBI agent secured heavy federal-issue handcuffs around his wrists. "You can't do this!" Voss screamed, his face an ugly mottled purple. Spit flew from his lips, catching the glare of the flashing strobe lights. "I am a decorated officer of the Oak Ridge Creek Police Department. I demand my union representative. I demand to speak to the chief of police. You feds have no jurisdiction on a local traffic stop." Special Agent Miller, the lead FBI agent on the scene, finished tightening the cuffs and stepped back, looking at Voss with an expression of profound disgust. "Your local union representative isn't cleared for the federal crimes you just committed, Thomas. You are being detained under the Espionage Act of 1917, Title 18, U.S. Code, Section 793, for unauthorized access and mishandling of national defense information. You are also being charged with the destruction of federal government property, false imprisonment, and criminal deprivation of civil rights under color of law." "It was a mistake," Voss wailed, the arrogant facade completely shattering. The realization of his doom was finally penetrating his thick skull. He wouldn't open the box. He was driving a suspiciously expensive car. He crossed the white line. I had probable cause. "We'll see about your probable cause." Elias's deep voice resonated across the tarmac. Elias walked over to the group, pulling his smartphone from his pocket. He synced it to the smartwatch still strapped to his wrist and played the audio file he had secretly recorded. The crisp, high-definition audio of the entire encounter echoed loudly in the quiet night. Every word, every fabricated lie about the smell of marijuana, every threatening demand Voss had made was played back for the federal agents to hear. Voss's face drained of blood, turning a sickly translucent white. He looked at Elias, his eyes wide with a terror he usually reserved for his victims. "Furthermore," Elias said smoothly, tapping the screen of his phone, "my vehicle is equipped with a dual-facing 4K resolution dashcam with integrated audio. It is currently uploading the footage of this entire traffic stop to a secure cloud server. The footage will conclusively prove that I maintained my lane perfectly, drove under the speed limit, and committed 0 traffic infractions. The stop was entirely illegal, predicated on racial profiling and an abuse of authority." Voss slumped against the cruiser, his legs threatening to give out. He turned his desperate eyes toward his young partner. Reed, tell them he was swerving. Tell them you smelled the weed too. You have to back me up, kid." Reed stood frozen, staring at his training officer. For weeks, Voss had taught him that the badge was a shield against consequences, that the brotherhood of the uniform meant covering for each other no matter what. But looking at the array of heavily armed federal agents and the towering, calm presence of the Army Ranger he had helped illegally detain, Reed made the most important decision of his life. Reed reached up to his chest, unclipped his Axon body camera, and held it out to Agent Miller. "I didn't smell any marijuana, sir," Reed said, his voice shaking but clear. Captain Thorne was driving perfectly. Officer Voss powered down his body camera before approaching the vehicle. He ordered me to retrieve the pry bar to break open the box, even after Captain Thorne warned him it was a federal container. I have it all on video. I'll testify to whatever you need."
"You little rat!"
Voss shrieked, lunging awkwardly at Reed before Agent Miller shoved him hard against the car. "Good choice, son," Agent Miller said, taking the camera from Reed. He looked at another agent. "Put Voss in the back of the transport. I don't want to hear his voice anymore." As Voss was unceremoniously shoved into the back of the dark unmarked Suburban, his cries echoing in the night, Colonel Grant turned back to Elias. "What about the vehicle?" Grant asked, looking at the deep gouges in the classic Chevelle's paint. "That was your father's, wasn't it?" Elias walked over to the car, running a hand gently over the damaged hood. "It was. It can be repaired, Colonel. Metal and paint can be fixed. Some things are more important." He looked toward the Suburban where Voss was locked away. "A predator with a badge has been taken off the streets. My father would consider that a fair trade for a paint job." The fallout from that warm autumn evening in Oak Ridge Creek hit the small, affluent town like a Category 5 hurricane. By the time the sun rose the next morning, Officer Harlan Voss was sitting in a windowless federal interrogation room in Charlotte, stripped of his uniform and dressed in an orange jumpsuit. The United States Department of Justice did not view the breach of JSOC intelligence lightly. It wasn't just a matter of a rogue cop stepping over the line. It was treated as a severe national security incident. The investigation, spearheaded by the FBI and heavily supported by the Army's Criminal Investigation Division, didn't stop with Voss. Agent Miller's team used the incident as a battering ram to audit the entire Oak Ridge Creek Police Department. They seized years of dashcam footage, body camera drives, and dispatch logs. What they uncovered was a systemic, deeply ingrained culture of racial profiling, asset forfeiture abuse, and constitutional violations. Harlan Voss wasn't an anomaly. He was simply the most brazen product of a corrupt precinct. Several other officers, including the chief of police, were forced into early retirement or indicted on federal civil rights charges. Several months later, the United States District Court in Charlotte was packed to absolute capacity. Elias Thorne, recently promoted to the rank of major, sat quietly in the front row of the gallery. He wore his immaculately pressed Army service uniform, his chest heavy with rows of ribbons, including a bronze star and a Purple Heart. He sat with the quiet, imposing stillness of a man entirely at peace with his surroundings. Harlan Voss sat at the defense table. He was entirely unrecognizable from the arrogant, puffed-up bully who had swaggered up to the Chevelle. He had lost significant weight. His hair was thinning and unkempt, his complexion pale and sallow. The cheap, ill-fitting suit he wore hung off his frame like a wet paper bag. The trial had been a massacre. Voss's defense attorney had tried to argue qualified immunity, claiming Voss was acting in good faith. The federal prosecutor had simply played the high-definition audio from Elias's smartwatch, coupled with the pristine dashcam footage and Rookie Reed's devastating testimony. The jury had taken less than 2 hours to reach a verdict. "Will the defendant please rise?" the Honorable Judge Preston Langley ordered, his voice echoing through the cavernous courtroom. Voss stood, his knees trembling so violently he had to grip the edge of the mahogany table just to stay upright. "Harlan Voss," Judge Langley began, peering down through his reading glasses with cold disdain. "In my 20 years on the federal bench, I have rarely seen such a flagrant, arrogant, and dangerous abuse of law enforcement authority. You were entrusted with a badge and a gun to protect the citizens of your community. Instead, you used them as tools of intimidation, preying on those you deemed vulnerable. The courtroom was completely silent. Voss stared at his shoes, tears welling in his eyes. "You thought you were pulling over an easy target," the judge continued, his voice rising in volume. "A man you racially profiled and assumed you could bully into submission. Instead, you unlawfully detained a decorated military officer and violently compromised highly classified intelligence, vital to the security of the United States. Your actions were not born of a mistake. They were born of malice, prejudice, and a staggering sense of entitlement." The judge slammed a stack of papers down on his desk. "For the charges of violating the civil rights of Major Elias Thorne, false imprisonment, destruction of federal property, and felony mishandling of classified intelligence, I sentence you to 15 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary to be served without the possibility of parole. Furthermore, you are forever stripped of your law enforcement credentials. Your pension is hereby revoked, and you will pay restitution for the damages caused to Major Thorne's property." The gavel slammed down with the finality of a coffin shutting. Bang! Voss collapsed back into his chair, burying his face in his hands as loud, racking sobs tore through his chest. The U.S. Marshals immediately stepped forward, grabbing him by the arms, hauling him to his feet, and dragging him toward the holding cells. As Voss was led past the gallery, he looked up through his tears and locked eyes with Elias. Elias didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He merely looked at the broken man with the cold, unyielding stare of a soldier who had neutralized a threat. Voss broke the eye contact first, dropping his head in absolute shame as the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom swallowed him whole. Outside the courthouse, the bright North Carolina sun was shining. Elias walked down the marble steps, adjusting his service cap. Waiting for him at the curb, gleaming like a polished sapphire in the midday sun, was the 1969 Chevrolet Chevelle SSS. The hood had been completely replaced and color-matched by one of the finest classic car restorers in the country. The bill was fully covered by the town of Oak Ridge Creek as part of a massive 7-figure civil settlement. Standing by the driver's side door was former rookie officer Caleb Reed. He was no longer wearing a police uniform. He had resigned from the force shortly after the incident, realizing that the culture of local policing in that town was irreparably broken. He was now wearing a crisp suit, working as an investigator for the county's public defender's office. "Car looks beautiful, Major," Reed said, offering a genuine, if slightly nervous, smile. "Thanks, Reed," Elias replied, returning the smile warmly. "And thank you for what you did in there. It took courage to stand up to him." "It was the right thing to do," Reed said softly. "You taught me more about honor in those minutes at a gas station than Voss taught me in months on the job." Elias nodded, shaking the young man's hand. He opened the heavy steel door of the Chevelle, slid into the luxurious leather bucket seat, and turned the key. The big block V8 roared to life, a deep, triumphant symphony of American muscle. Elias put the car in gear and pulled out onto the street, the wind catching his window. He drove past the city limits, heading back toward the base, back toward his duty. The road ahead was clear, the shadows were gone, and for the first time in a long time, the drive felt completely, perfectly free. Power without accountability is a poison that corrupts the soul. Officer Harlan Voss believed his badge made him untouchable, using it as a weapon against those he felt were beneath him. But the universe has a profound way of delivering justice when bullies cross the wrong line. Major Elias Thorne proved that true strength isn't found in shouting or intimidation, but in absolute calm discipline. Voss's arrogance cost him his freedom, his career, and his legacy, while Elias drove away with his dignity and his father's beautiful car intact. If you love this story of instant karma and ultimate justice, please like this video, share it with your friends to spread the message, and hit that subscribe button for more incredible real-life stories. Leave a comment below on what you would have done in Elias's shoes.